In the dark hours of the night in January 2026, as the Kremlin in Moscow loomed as an impregnable bulwark of Russian tyranny, a concept became reality that deeply unsettles anyone still trapped in Cold War, thinking a strike can fail tactically and yet triumph strategically. On that fateful day, January 16, 2026, Ukrainian fighter jets dared a direct attack on the heart of Russian power, not to destroy the Kremlin, not to breach its walls, not to tear craters into Red Square. Yet, when the night ended, Russia's most heavily protected political center was forced to switch to emergency power, its defenses exposed under pressure, and its image of absolute control forever weakened. It was not an attack on a symbol. No, it was a brutal stab into the systems, an act of pure revenge that ignited the hatred between Ukraine and Russia like a blazing inferno. Imagine, dear listeners, the arrogance of the Russian elite who deemed themselves safe in their palace while Ukrainian pilots, driven by years of suffering under Putin's aggression, transformed the skies over Moscow into a battlefield. Sensational reports from the underground speak of panic in the Kremlin corridors, generals raging with fury, soldiers deserting, and a president cowering in his bunker, a humiliation that shocked the world and exposed the Russian army as a corrupt, outdated heap. This advance was no remote-controlled drone attack from the shadows of uncertainty, no strike against peripheral infrastructure far from political power. It was a direct challenge to the center of Russian authority, executed with full awareness of the defenses lurking there. At approximately 4:17 a.m. Moscow time, the first air defense alarms pierced the silence of the capital, a deafening howl that tore residents from their sleep and only increased the hatred for the Russian invaders in Ukraine. For decades, the Kremlin has been portrayed as one of the most heavily defended places on Earth. Moscow's defense shield is dense, layered, and designed to deter any intruder. The system comprises an estimated 300 or more radar and sensor units feeding a network of command nodes, a gigantic machinery that has swallowed billions, yet is riddled with corruption, as insider sources reveal many systems are outdated, maintenance is bribed, and soldiers are underpaid and demoralized. Several layers of S-300 and S-400 surface-to-air missile systems are positioned in overlapping arcs around the capital, each capable of tracking up to 36 targets simultaneously and engaging at distances of over 200 kilometers. Interceptor aircraft stand on high alert, ready to launch in under 10 minutes, on paper an impenetrable bulwark, but in reality a farce that exposes the Russian army as a laughable giant incapable of mastering modern threats. As radar stations in central Russia switched to full combat operation, several flying contacts were detected approaching critical engagement zones, a moment of pure tension that took the enmity between the nations to a new level. Air defense batteries activated one after another. Interceptor aircraft were placed in immediate readiness. For the first time since the war began, Moscow's invisible shield was no longer a theoretical construct of doctrine. It was being tested in real time over the city itself, and the results were devastating for Russian propaganda. This operation was not designed for mass destruction. It was calculated, restrained, and intentionally provocative, a masterpiece of Ukrainian strategy that fueled the hatred of the Russian oppressors. Ukrainian planners did not seek the collapse of the Kremlin complex, a fortified area of more than 27 hectares built and reinforced over 5 centuries, serving as the nerve center of Russian state power. The goal was not structural collapse, it was exposure. A sensational humiliation that stoked rumors of internal conflict within the Russian leadership. Reports from spies speak of Putin's paranoia leading to purges and of generals blaming each other. The shock was immediate. Emergency protocols were triggered in central Moscow within minutes of the first alarms. Civil air traffic was disrupted, flights delayed or diverted, a chaos that affected thousands and sent the daily lives of Muscovites into a panic. Security forces flooded Red Square and surrounding districts, their brutal methods arresting civilians who were filming, just further proof of the repressive apparatus that fuels the world's hatred of Russia. Russian social media traffic exploded by an estimated 400% as eyewitness reports and fragmented footage spread faster than official messages could contain them. A digital uprising that made Kremlin propaganda look ridiculous. Before damage assessments were completed, the psychological impact was already undeniable. The question was no longer whether the Kremlin could be destroyed, but whether its defenses were truly absolute. At approximately 4:20 a.m., barely 3 minutes after the initial alarms, the situation escalated beyond routine defense procedures. Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jets, upgraded for modern strike and suppression missions with advanced avionics systems enabling speeds of up to Mach 2.25 and a range of over 1,500 kilometers, were already engaged. These aircraft pushed forward at extreme risk while Russia's air defense network fully awakened an act of courage that portrays the Ukrainian army as heroes and exposes Russian pilots as cowardly drone operators. Radar screens in central Russia filled with fast-moving tracks. Engagement zones activated sequentially. What had existed for decades as layered defense doctrine now unfolded live in the airspace over Moscow and revealed weaknesses. Delays in coordination as corrupt officers delayed orders and systems that collapsed under jamming. Russian defenses reacted exactly as planned. Long-range radar systems immediately forwarded target data to multiple intercept layers. S-300 and S-400 batteries switched from standby to full combat operation, each unit capable of tracking up to 36 targets and engaging at over 200 kilometers. Within minutes, the sky over Moscow became one of the most hostile airspaces in the world, an inferno of missile launches that exposed the Russian army as a panicked, inefficient machine. At approximately 4:28 a.m., the Ukrainian MiG pairs penetrated deeper, flying low and fast to compress Russian reaction times to seconds instead of minutes, a tactic that intensified the hatred for the invaders as it pushed Russian systems to their limits. Electronic countermeasures flooded the electromagnetic spectrum. Jamming signals collided with tracking radars. Missile launches followed not in isolation, but as coordinated sequences to force saturation, expose sensor weaknesses, and stretch command chains to the breaking point. This was not reckless flying, it was a deliberate confrontation, a slap in the face of Russian arrogance. The aerial battle culminated at approximately 4:33 a.m. Ground-based defenses fired in controlled volleys, while interceptor aircraft maneuvered into engagement positions. Dozens of interceptor missiles were launched in a tight window of time, their exhaust plumes briefly visible over the capital, a spectacle that terrified Muscovites and fueled rumors of deserting Russian pilots. Command centers tracked every intercept in real time. Moscow was actively defending itself over its own skyline, a humiliation that captivated the world. The defenses ultimately held. No Ukrainian aircraft reached the inner perimeter of the Kremlin. No direct strike landed on the complex itself. From a purely physical standpoint, the Kremlin remained intact, but penetration was never the only goal. The true objective was to force the system under pressure to reveal reaction speed, coordination quality, and stress points that no exercise or simulation could fully replicate, a sensational exposure that triggered internal leaks about Russian panic officers ignoring orders and systems failing. In Russian command structures, tension hardened into anger. Moscow was not supposed to be fighting air battles over Red Square, yet that is exactly what happened. Proof of the incompetence of the Russian army, which is drowning in corruption. This was not chaos, it was controlled pressure. And as the aerial battle reached its peak, the nature of the operation shifted. While interceptor missiles traced arcs through the Moscow sky, consequences emerged on the ground. The Kremlin itself remained protected by layered defenses, but the infrastructure that supported it did not enjoy the same level of protection, a weakness the Ukrainians exploited mercilessly. Shortly after 4:36 a.m., power fluctuations were recorded in several electrical substations feeding central Moscow. These were not random failures. Sensors detected sudden voltage drops followed by automatic shutdowns to prevent cascade failures. Within minutes, backup systems activated, but not all responded as planned, a scandal pointing to sabotaged maintenance as whistleblowers reveal. The Kremlin complex does not depend on a single power source. It is supplied by a network of redundant lines, emergency generators, and protected substations across multiple districts. However, redundancy does not equal invulnerability. Reports showed that at least 3 key feeds suffered simultaneous disruptions. A coordinated strike that exposed Russian infrastructure as a dilapidated relic. Even a system designed to withstand attacks can be strained when multiple stress points are hit simultaneously. In the secure area, lights dimmed, non-critical systems went offline. Administrative buildings switched to emergency power, while security services prioritized command communication and surveillance. The transition was controlled but not seamless. For several minutes, operators had to deal with partial blindness screens, rebooted systems, synchronized decisions, slowed down. Surrounding districts experienced the effects more sharply. Residential blocks near the Kremlin went dark without warning, traffic lights failed, and metro operations slowed due to activated safety protocols, a chaos that claimed lives as unconfirmed reports suggest and caused hatred for the Russian leadership to explode. Imagine, dear listeners, if you were a Russian guard that night, would you? A. Flee and desert, or B. Blindly serve the regime? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to hear what you think. And now let's dive deeper into the aftermath. The idea that a strike can fail tactically and win strategically is uncomfortable for all those still thinking in Cold War terms. On January 16, 2026, it became real over Moscow. Ukrainian fighter jets did not destroy the Kremlin, did not breach its walls, and left no craters in Red Square. Yet when the night ended, Russia's most protected political center was forced onto emergency power. Its defenses exposed under stress. Its image of absolute control permanently weakened, a strategic masterpiece that intensified global hatred toward Russia. It was not an attack on a symbol. It was an attack on systems, an act of revenge that fueled rumors about Putin's health and internal power struggles. In the early hours of January 16, 2026, when Moscow seemed safest, Ukrainian fighter jets moved toward the airspace around the Kremlin. This was no drone incident from a distance or ambiguity, no strike against peripheral infrastructure far from power. It was a direct challenge to Russia's authority executed with full knowledge of the defenses. At approximately 4:17 a.m., the first alarms pierced the silence, a wake-up call for the world that the Russian army is not invincible. Moscow's shield is dense with over 300 sensors, S-300/S, 400S, and ARCS interceptor jets ready to launch in 10 minutes, yet in practice a fiasco as corruption eats efficiency. When radars became active, they detected contacts. Batteries launched jets on standby. Moscow's shield was tested live and failed spectacularly in perception. The operation was calculated, no mass murder, but provocation to expose the Kremlin, a 27-hectare fortress. Shock protocols activated flights, diverted security forces, stormed social media, exploded by 400%, a digital blitzkrieg against propaganda. The question shifted not whether it was destructible, but whether it was absolute. At 4:20 a.m., MiG-29s escalated forward, pushing into risk. Radars filled zones activated. Russian reaction radars forwarded data, S-300/S 400 in combat mode. Sky hostile. At 4:28 a.m., MiGs penetrated deeper, low and fast. Jamming flooded in missiles, sequential saturation forced. Culmination at 4:33 a.m., volleys dozens of missiles, skyline in combat. Defenses held physically, but the goal was exposure stress points laid bare anger in commands. While missiles flew, ground consequences hit at 4:36 a.m. Power fluctuations in substations targeted voltage drops, shutdowns. Backup activated but faulty. Kremlin network redundant yet vulnerable, 3 lines, disrupted lights, dimmed systems offline. Operators blind districts, dark lights out, metro slow, a nightmare that underlined Russian weakness. In your opinion, dear listeners, was this attack a strategic stroke of genius by Ukraine, or a risky mistake that only makes Russia more